Come on.
All right, and then I think we'll do a quick round of introductions because we have a different group this time. And so I'm Bree Brennett Dreyfus. I teach high school physics in the greater San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm the Step Up Program ambassador. And then I'm going to pass in just the order of my screen. So Chris, if you want to go next, then you can choose somebody else to introduce yourself.
So, again, I'm Chris Louie. I'm just outside of Washington, D.C. in Maryland, and I was a two-year college faculty member here in Maryland, and now I am running optics through the American Association of Physics Teachers. And next on my screen is Tom. So I will pass this off to Tom.
Hello, I'm Tom Oakham. I taught physics for 40 something years at two-year colleges in the Houston, Texas area, the last being Lee College in Baytown, Texas. I am a member of the optics team and I guess, chair of this continuing professional development workshop. So I'm going to pass it off to Brian Lee.
Hi, I'm Brian Lee. I teach physics and astronomy at Santa Fe College in Gainesville, Florida, and I'm currently a member of the two-year college guidelines revision team. And I'll pass it off to Jolene.
Hi, I'm Jolene Johnson. I'm currently a physics professor at University of Wisconsin River Falls. I'm helping present for Step Up. I've been involved in Step Up almost since it started. My other background is I taught basically everything from eighth grade through graduate school, including community college for a few years. So lots of random teaching experience. Oh, right. I'm supposed to pass it off. Joe, I don't think you've gone yet.
Hello, I'm Joe Hefner. I taught two-year college physics and astronomy for 30 years here in Western North Carolina. And I am part of the optics group as well. And I work with Tom and Chris to help plan and facilitate these workshops. And I hope today is another beneficial opportunity for everyone.
You have to pick someone, Joe.
Dan.
Hello, I'm Dan Michelson. I'm a recent PhD graduate of physics. So I have some teaching assistant experience, but in this upcoming spring, I'm going to be teaching at a two-year college in San Diego, Miramar. So I'm looking forward to that. Okay, and Joseph, have you gone?
I have not. And like Dan, I am teaching in the San Diego area. I am teaching at San Diego Mesa College. And this is actually my first year being a full-time faculty member and the first time I've attended one of these optics workshops. And who hasn't gone yet? Eric?
Yes, thanks. I'm Eric Christensen. I've taught physics and astronomy at South Florida State College for 20 years. Recently retired, but I'm still teaching astronomy as an adjunct. And I'll pass it on. David, have you gone?
I have not gone. I'm David Marasco. I teach at Foothill College, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area. Also a member of the optics team, and I saw there was an opportunity to see Bree this weekend, so I'm all over that. And I think Ted is the last person who has not gone.
Oh man, I'm last. So I teach physics and engineering at Columbia Basin College in southeastern Washington. This is my second year here. It'll be my fifth year teaching overall since getting the PhD. Just excited to learn more.
All right, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share one of the three screens. Still got my remote set up here. So we have a couple of different things that we want to talk to you about in the beginning, just to kind of set it up about the Step Up program, kind of review the other ones that we've got so that if you didn't attend those workshops, you have a chance to go back and learn more about that. And then also just more specifically about the everyday actions today. And so Jolene and I are going to be co-presenting. And since this is a small group, and also given the Zoom format, we have the ability to chat and raise our hands and let us know when you have questions. We do want this to be more of a discussion base. So anytime that you have questions at any point, or you want to share, oh, I did something like that, or oh, that reminds me of a specific problem that I've had, let us know. So looking at the discussion, this is one of the things you may have seen from the Step Up program, which is our discussion norms poster. And so this we see in a lot of different places, and it is something that you can use actually throughout the year, although it specifically aligns with our Women in Physics lesson as part of the discussion, as the students are exploring bias and kind of historic issues. So these are our points about discussions. We want to make sure we share the airtime equitably. We value differences. When we argue using evidence. We make sure everyone feels safe, recognize that discomfort is okay, and that you have to own your impact. That one we usually have to explain to the younger students a little bit differently, because intent is not the same as impact. And for them, they don't always see that difference. And we want to make sure that we're creating a sense of community, which is why we're very excited to do this with optics. And so our agenda today is that we're going to go over kind of an overview of the project, introduce you to specifically to what we call the Everyday Actions Guide. And then we tend to take a little break in between, and we want to make sure that we have a small group discussion. But that at any point that you need to walk away is fine. Obviously, we're all adults. We want to make sure that we share the ideas that we do come up with when we have a chance to break up into small groups, and that you have access to these materials when we're done. So this presentation is more of our training facilitation, but there's separate teacher guides that have more information that we'll be sharing as well. So when we start, we'd like you to consider the state of women in physics in the United States. And this could have been from your undergraduate, your graduate, or your current career, and how you've seen women in interacting with physics and in the physics classrooms in the United States. And so we would like to show you this graph and see what you might notice. And I'm actually going to skip to the next one here where it's a little bit bigger. Makes it a little bit easier to see. So you can either write in the chat or unmute. What are some things that you notice about this graph?
Yeah, I see Brian wrote bio's getting way better retention than physics. Yes.
Chris said something happens to women in physics between high school and college. And David, physics is the only field that goes down when women get to college. So you're hitting upon probably the big three things that we see people notice. One is that biology and chemistry seem to be fairly level, or where we look at the decline, most people would say, okay, that's about what I'd expect. Life happens. People don't finish degrees. We would expect a little bit of attrition between beginning college, end of college, and larger degrees. But then it's very drastic, the difference between those in physics. And then specifically noting the time when that happens. It's not a little bit every time. It's a drastic decrease. And then after that, that remains very level. So if we're looking at the last three columns to the right, physics is the one that is the most consistent after that initial drop off. And so there's a bunch of very interesting things that your students can pull out of this. And your students with more graph experience are probably going to pull out quite a bit and want to see a lot more. And then Eric was wondering if women see many careers in physics, and seeing the possibilities for the careers is the whole point of our first lesson, actually. So when we're looking at this one, the kind of the biggest takeaway is that although women make up about 50% of our high school classrooms, it is less than 20% at post-secondary, all the way through the PhD. And when we say makes up 50%, it is not going to be consistent across all of the high school physics classrooms. So a general physics class is going to be closer to parity, whereas like I teach APC, Mech, and E&M. I got very excited that I got to 40% female this year, because previously it was 25 to 30. So it definitely changes. from class to class.
And that,
go ahead,
and that college entrance too, that's physics major classes. So think typically calc-based physics. But I know many of you probably, like, I teach an algebra-based physics class and it looks totally different at the college level. And my difference between community college and other colleges, I've also seen significant differences depending on what paths student takes. So this is really looking at those people who are going to be a physics major.
And so Chris is mentioning a leaky pipeline. That is often used to describe that once we get women into most STEM degrees and other historically marginalized groups, that there tends to be something along the way as if they leak out of the pipe. And that also is saying that there's only one path, from beginning to end. So we are seeing less attrition in physics, but there's this massive drop off. So like, how much lower can we go when we get through the rest of it? So this is what came about when we started the Step Up program. These were our goals. And here we wanted to draw on research and evidence to mobilize thousands of high school physics teachers in the US, and specifically to reduce barriers and inspire young women to pursue physics degrees in college. But that comes with shifting deep-seated cultural views about who does physics. Because if we just inspire them to consider pursuing physics and then they get to either your or for your institution and it's not a safe space for them to learn, then they do leave. And, we haven't accomplished the goal of getting more women into physics generally. So this was our goal. This chart seems a little bit outdated as time keeps marching on and we lost a few years with COVID. But when we started the research portion in 2017, 2018, the goal was to get 50% of the undergraduate college entrance students to be identifying as female. And so that's the goal. This chart I find very stark just to see this is where we're at and this is what equality would look like. And that's how much the gap is, which seems like a really, really tall task. But we've calculated that because there's 27,000 physics teachers approximately in the US that teach at the high school level, if just half of them got one more physics major than they usually did, then the gap will be gone. Jolene, could you take the next one?
Yep. So when we started Step Up, right, our project focus is really on looking at high school. At least that's where we started. We're expanding. But the reason for this is that if you think about when students kind of start picking careers, the first time they really do this is at the high school level. And especially when you look at people who became physicists, this is also true, especially female physicists. The other thing is you have to look at the teachers and what sort of knowledge they have. So in elementary school, where there are some issues and it's useful to think about things there, but typically most teachers of elementary, middle school are not really physics knowledge, right? They probably haven't taken any physics class or maybe one at some point in their life. And then also, if you look at the students, right, they are more interested or they're more closer to that decision time. So you're really getting them when they're starting to decide, like, what college might I want to go to? What might I want to do? Then if you look at the college level, right, we've already seen that huge drop up. So we already know there's a problem. So you're already missing a lot of people. But also when you look at high school classrooms, they are smaller sometimes. And you have more time for that relationship. Certainly you see your students for a whole year typically. So you get to interact with them more and understand them as people.
Yeah. And Chris, excellent point that we do see a lot of science and math avoidance and hesitance with the elementary. So even though with the NGSS standards, a lot of physics concepts have moved younger, it's still difficult for them. And a lot of these goals and the reason that we focused it in the high school is still true about two-year colleges, where your students may have come there because they're not quite sure what their next step is, or they're going to change it, or they just have to think a little bit more strategically about their careers and about their colleges. And so this also gives you the opportunity to do the same kind of counseling.
And Eric has a point in the chat here too about planting seeds in middle school. And there are so a lot of people will know this, right? Like you probably already, like if you talk to high school students, they've already maybe become uninterested when you look at AP. So there is a version of these lessons for middle school. And we definitely talk to people like ninth grade, there's ninth grade physical science, and even some of the middle school classrooms is something we're working on.
So these are the parts of the Step Up curriculum that I've offered. So we have 2 classroom lessons, and then the third part, what we're going over today, is more the teacher pedagogical side. So the careers in physics lesson is meant to be just like, and I think Eric was the one who made the point earlier, we want to show them all the different careers that are available in physics. Because if you ask your students, what can you do with a physics degree? Physicist, teacher, binary choice, right? So we use that lesson to give them a little bit more opportunity and see themselves in the careers of physics. The women in physics lesson is meant to look at the history of women in physics and also other historically marginalized groups, looking at systemic bias, looking at cultural norms, and like why do we have in the United States only really this giant drop off in physics? And so it's kind of a higher level conversation. We tend to have that with them in the second semester when we created more of a classroom community. And then the everyday actions guide, that's the part for the teachers. And I've often described this as like, it's the lit review that explains all of these great little strategies that you can do every day inside and outside of the classroom that really help you to create this inclusive sense of community and to bolster each kid's physics identity. That idea that I can do physics, people see me as a physicist. And so we're going to set that up, but we're going to be trying to think about your own classroom, which for you could be a lecture hall or a lab space or a small group space where you're advising future graduates. We're trying to think about some things that you might do on a daily or weekly basis to encourage women and other underrepresented students in physics. Like, what are those conscionable acts that you do? So if you have any, feel free to raise your hand, or you can type it into the chat. No one wants to go first. I'll share one. One of our avid teachers made these adorable postcards in the theme of our school, and they were pre-stamped. And it was part of a campaign of sharing good messages home to our students because we tend to only call when something's bad. And I took all of those postcards and I mailed one to all of the incoming females for my APC class and said, I'm so excited you're taking physics. And that was it. I had girls I'd never met before come by my classroom to tell me. I had current students that told me, did you send one to my friend who's going to take AP next year? She got it. She was so excited. And so that little bit was like, I want you to be here and I'm excited that you're coming. Did not take me long, but it had a real positive impact. And so, Brian, could you expand on that about the whiteboards?
Yeah, so I used to have my small group work done in clusters at the desks, student groups of 3 or 4. And I noticed that sometimes one person would be doing most of the writing and it was upside down for some people, so people couldn't really see what was happening. So during the pandemic, class sizes got a whole lot smaller. And so I was able to put people up on the main whiteboard because I had more whiteboard space. And I noticed that there was a whole lot more participation because then it was way easier for everyone to see. The words were way bigger. It was right side up for everyone. There was more space to look at the work. And people suddenly started chatting even more than they had been before. And I've had, there was one woman student last year who said, physics is now my most social class.
Have you, Brian, you haven't read it, you should try this. Oh, I lost it. Hold on right there.
Uh-huh.
He has building thinking classrooms. He does a whole bunch on what he calls vertical whiteboarding and all the research behind like why standing up and doing it on the whiteboard is better. I'll put that. Yeah, Kristen.
Definitely side bonus, less cell phone use when they're standing at the whiteboard.
That was one of his research points too. I'll have to put that in the chat. Anybody else want to share something that they do to encourage them to stay into physics or to feel like they belong?
Eric put something in the chat. He said, I have students in my astronomy class pick an astronomer from a different culture and do a short report on the challenges they faced and how they overcame them. I also do some things on famous women astronomers on a different week, and students really get to see them engage and enjoy those activities. So like sharing people that don't necessarily get shared when you talk about famous physicists and astronomers. That's a really common thing people do.
And Joe, I like yours, making sure that you're mentioning in astrophysics, it was predominantly a female field to begin with. All right, well, we're going to go through a couple other ones, but if you remember anything as you're going along and realizing like, oh, I didn't think about it, but that thing that I do is actually promoting class community. Yeah, I mean, if they're Jillian, go ahead.
And then there's also, Thomas said we put up hallway posters of famous women. I have those famous women too. That's my entire office. And so when people come in to get help, they see just female physicists and astronomers.
Mm-hmm. All right. Jillian, you want to introduce this part? I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah. Joe, oh, there you go. All right. So in the, whoops, that's the, okay. So we are going to talk about the Everyday Actions Guide, which, as Bree said, is like the lit review of all the things that you can do. So we're going to start off by having you fill in a Google form, which is basically a checklist for you to think through what sorts of things you've done. There is a paper version of this form, and you can get to that. The link is kind of on the screen right now, but if you go to the chat, there is a Google form. If you want to take a second to fill that out, and we'll go through it. And if anyone's having problems, let me know. All right, it looks like most of us are responded. If you're still working on it, that's okay. Here, hopefully, is the results. Yeah. Okay. So, looking at it, so they're also grouped by the different types of actions, which we'll talk about in a second. So look at kind of where the group is at. These are the first group and where you fell. We have, so looking at the first one, a lot of us are on the higher end, which is not surprising, right? Because we all were interested enough to show up. I love this. So we all provide students, this is especially true when I worked with community college students. This is a big thing to be providing them that feedback. Labs. Many of us know some of the research, right, around not isolating women, which is great. This is great. We're ensuring women take off active roles. We've bolstered confidence. When you're addressing the whole class, yeah. Growth mindset, this is so key. We'll talk about some of this stuff. And then on assessments, right, I think this is someplace where especially community college faculty have really done, right? You've had to do a lot of these things that high schools are working on too around that. I think that's great. And then outside the classroom, I know some of these don't exactly apply depending on, where you're at. But I will say, as someone who works at a college, I've discovered that all of these things that this says about counselors and talking to families is actually true for the college level. So talking to admissions counselors and then you can actually go back into high schools that maybe your college recruits from and do some of this. So I'll tell you about some of that. But I know a lot of it doesn't directly apply if you're talking to parents. And I know we can't talk to parents, which is something I love about teaching college instead of high school. All right. I love it. The physics. So Chris wrote in the chat, the physics scenarios are bunnies instead of the typical like Bob and Pete are doing this sports thing. That's great. I'm going to stop sharing, Bri, if you want to put the slides.
Yeah. And with that, as Joe commented that he was saying, I'm going to put try to for a lot of these. And that is the tricky part. That's one of the problems that we've had with measuring this to the research level that we did the effect of the other two lessons is that teachers tend to think that we are doing something and we don't. Similarly, when I was a brand new teacher and I had the coach that was coming in, and one of the activities she did with me is, do you call on more boys or girls? I'm equal, of course, equal. And she'd sit there and just do a count, by percentage. And everybody I've ever heard doing that activity has been surprised at the disconnects between our opinions and what we actually do. So that's one of the difficulty things in measuring this. But looking at the summary of the results that Jolene shared, was there anything that was surprising? Or then also reflections of like, what were we unsure to mark, like what Joe was saying? Another thing to look at is like, what areas were really easy for you to mark? What were you like, yes, I do that thing. I know I do it all the time.
I suppose for me, the things that excuse me, that happen directly in the classroom in front of everybody, the things that happen outside, like counselors and so forth. We had advisors, but there was typically a lot of turnover in the advising assignments, and so from one semester to the next, we might not know who the advisors are in a particular area. It was sort of a strange situation. So I can't claim that I always, reached out to the advisors to encourage them to encourage more women to take physics. I don't know that I was able to do that at an acceptable level.
Any others, things that were difficult or easy for you to say that you did, or that you're interested in doing more of just based on the list? All right, I think we're going to get into more examples of some of the specific ones, and these are all based on specific research done. So in the teacher's guide, it's all cited. It's all cited, and it goes to a citations list of resources where you can read the study that came up with this suggestion. So the everyday actions are broken up into 5 major categories. And the first one is talking to students individually, but we also have things like facilitating group work and labs, addressing the whole class, planning and assessing, and then what we can do outside the classroom to encourage our students. And so Jolene's going to introduce our first one.
Yeah, so this is something, right, we all are talking to our students. And so thinking about on that individual level, what are you saying to them that may either subtly encourage them or suddenly discourage them from doing physics? And so in the guide, there's a lot of really good examples. So, oops, I just lost my screen. Oops, there we go. So it's all about recognizing the students. So for example, when you recognize students, one of the things that I do is I will try to say like, hey, you did a really good job on this test, or you made a huge improvement. It's not always about just praising the people who did a good job, but it's about praising those students who maybe got a C before and now they got a C plus, or they got a B, or you saw that they have really improved their math skills or things like that. It can go a long way because there's a lot of research that shows this particular praising students actually encourages women and underrepresented minorities even more so than the men. And if you think about the attitudes that the male students will sometimes bring to your class, right? They're the people who might be like, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this no matter what. I don't need anyone to tell me. Not always, right? But the women tend to be a little more unsure of themselves. And so that one bad test or not having anyone say good job can really discourage them. So it's really important to give them that direct feedback that's like, hey, you're good at this. You should consider doing it. Other examples of that is directing female students, particularly, so directing students to female students for help. So often there's a lot of research that shows even if the female students are doing the best in the class, other students will just go to the male students because there's so much of that stereotype that they're the people who know it. And so by saying like, hey, you're working in the group, it looks like Sally over here knows how to do this. Maybe you guys can talk together, or having the female students as the tutors even, and having those students recommending them for tutor positions on your campus, even if they're not going to be engineers or physics majors, right? If you have that excellent student who's in algebra-based physics, who's going to do pre-med or whatever, they can still be really good tutors for that class and helping the female students see it. And then on campus, I'm sure you have things like different clubs, engineering, all those things. Make sure you're directing women to those types of opportunities. Another good one at two-year colleges is the CUWIP, talking to students about, hey, you're interested in engineering or physics. Have you considered going to the undergraduate women in physics conferences that happen every year? And they don't have to be 100% decided that they're going to be a physics major, and sending them to these conferences is an amazing opportunity. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm happy to share more, but I think a lot of people know, so I'll leave it at that. And then also it's important to understand what your students value. So one of the things that I do with my students of any level is I have them write a little essay at the beginning that's basically what are their attitudes towards STEM or physics, depending on what class I'm teaching, and support those attitudes with evidence. And this is what really helps me see like, okay, so they're coming in, especially in algebra base, like they're a little bit afraid of what's happening. They didn't have a good experience, or they didn't have physics in high school because they were told not to take physics in high school because it would ruin their GPA, right? It gives you that sort of insight into your students. And then it helps you see like they're in this because they're really interested, right? Or they really want to be a doctor and they're really interested in doing this, and you can better connect with them. And then finally, the thing that we all do that I saw, which is really great for community college, is connecting it to your own, like your personal stories of struggle, right? We have different stories in our students, especially in certain schools, but I always make sure to talk about what happens when I fail a test, right? And mentioning that I have failed a test. And when I was in college, I had to bring a stuffed duck to my test because I'd get so nervous and I'd sit there petting my stuffed duck. So they all think I'm crazy. but they understand that it's pretty normal to struggle with like test anxiety and to do badly sometimes and all those sorts of things.
One point I'd like to make on what's talking. Oh, David, go ahead.
I was going to jump in on that comment and talk about personalizing and using it a good way to send messages. I have a copy of the department photo for Stony Brook University Physics Department from 1966 or 65. And I use that because Dirac is in that photo, and way in the back row, my dad is in that photo. And I talk about my dad was the first year graduate student with the newest car, so he would often get tagged as being Dirac's chauffeur. And I grew up basically with these stories like, oh, yeah, I drove this guy around and we met this person. And then I pivot to when I was in school, I was almost never the smartest kid in class or the hardest working kid in class. I just was somebody who had a physics professor as a dad. And that really set me up for a career. And I had all these built-in advantages, and that's where I'm at. That's why I'm at where I'm at now. And we have this idea of the meritocracy in science, and the people at the top are there because they're the most brilliant or the most skilled or whatever. And a lot of times it's just, well, where did you start? That's going to help predict where you finish. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, okay, raise your hand. Is one of your parents a physicist? And nobody raises their hands, or one or two. And it's like, okay, well, not everybody has the advantages I had, okay? Some people have far fewer advantages. And when you look around the room and you're saying, this person gets it and I don't, they're a physics person and I'm not, maybe they had advantage that you have no idea that they know about, right? It's like, okay, they went to a high school where they could track into a physics class when they were a sophomore or whatever, and you didn't even have physics at your high school. So just really sort of play up a lot of what looks like success is just built-in advantage, and don't get intimidated when other people are seemingly way ahead of you. They're just at a different place in their journey.
Excellent point, David. I was going to say similarly to that is that when we say talk to students individually, that we take for granted that they have internalized our like approval or appreciation or like you're doing a good job because we put grades on paper. And for some students, that does translate to my teacher likes me, my teacher thinks I can do this, but not for all students. And they will still see it and still suffer from stereotype threat. And, oh, this is just one time that I did well. It doesn't really mean that I'm a physics person. And there's a study, I don't think it's quoted in our EAG, that showed that men wouldn't drop a class until they had like a C minus, but women would drop it at like a B. And I tell my students about that frequently because there's just going to be a disconnect between what success looks like for some of our students, and it doesn't necessarily match what we consider to be successful. So it's very important to have those conversations with students.
One other thing too is just when I'm teaching a freshman seminar right now for our physics majors, which has been a really interesting experience. But one of the things that I've caught is so many women have internalized this idea that you need to get an A in your major or you shouldn't be in the major. And so I've been making an effort to have people who are alumni of our school who are working in these amazing engineering jobs and stuff. And we talk about like, oh yeah, you were actually a C+ student in college and look at where you're at now. And so especially in physics, we tend to give lower grades and that can be really discouraging, but really normalizing that and being like, it's okay. You don't need to have all A's as long as it's something you're still interested in.
And so, yeah, Chris, that's very, very common. You thought you were failing your class, but and doing worse than your classmates, but you were in the upper half.
Oh, and I have one other story. This is hilarious to me. No, it's not actually hilarious at all. But when I was in graduate school, I was the only woman in my program. Six of us started. I was the only one who made it through my PhD. And I also had the highest score on the written exam that you have to take to stay in graduate school when I passed it. But I remember thinking like, I didn't even know that really, because all of the male professors, like it's just not normalized that you would tell someone good job and like really great job. No one ever said a word to me, no one acknowledged. And as a female, I was like, what is happening? Because it's just not in other classes outside of physics. You would definitely get that feedback of, hey, we really want you to work in our lab. You think you're doing a great job, but it just never occurred to them that it might help people to hear that they did a good job. So think about that as you're encouraging your students.
With the logistics of actually running a lab-based class, the facilitating group work is the second major category. And this one has a lot of research behind it in that we know we do better. I used to put my one girl at every lab bench, to try and spread it out. And research has shown that that's not beneficial to create islands for any marginalized group. And so making sure that you're choosing groups and choosing roles for those group members, that is taking the possibility that somebody might just assume leadership because of their gender away, or assume that they're going to do the hands-on stuff. Theodore, you wanted to make a point?
Oh, I just I group, I always go back and forth on this because I used to randomize the groups all the time, and every class period move people around. But then I started putting all the female students in one group, or those who identify female in one group. But then I can't randomize my groups anymore, so I'm sort of stuck. And I'm not sure what the best way. Maybe there is no best way to go with all that. But yeah, so right now I am putting all my female students. I actually was surprised. I had one class where I had two groups of females. I had that many females in my class. I think I had like 7 or 8 female students in one class, and a calculus-based physics class, which usually we don't have a lot of those students in there. Thank you.
So it doesn't have to be an all-female lab group, but it just has to be that they're not by themselves, like a 1 to 3 situation. So my lab groups are set up for twos. Our classroom tables are our lab tables. So I have 2 males, 2 females at the tables whenever I can. And if the numbers don't work out that way, then I often have a 3 to 1 with the female to male, and have that be the way that they're doing their groups. So
yeah,
go ahead.
If you're really short on females, one of the other things I've done is very quickly identified the other people in the room who would be more supportive of the women and are more aware of like where they're at, and I try to at least group those people together. And sometimes that's underrepresented people, right? But not always. But just keeping that in mind and identifying the people that are able to step back and let the women lead and respect them, and being careful to find out the 1 or 2 that you have in the class who are not going to be helpful, and making sure you don't isolate them with the female students.
And Tom, that is definitely a thing that you learn about your students as you're going along, that there are some of the girls like, nah, I'm just going to put you with the boys. You're going to keep them in line. And it depends on your individual students. And the randomizing is a point that's actually one of the things in the building thinking classrooms, is that the randomness and the visible randomness with students is important to realize that you're not kind of picking and choosing. But it seems like if you do that enough and as frequently as the research suggests, that you're kind of getting rid of the other issues with lab groups, because he advocates for changing them every class period or every few days. And so at that point, you're going to be creating a lot larger class community a lot faster. And so we don't get as many of the established group dynamics for having a lab group for as long as possible. But one of the things with the choosing the group member roles that's important is that you're assigning as much as possible the females and other marginalized groups to touch the lab equipment. And that's one of the things I'll mention in Letters of Rec as well, is like they did the lab stuff. They didn't just sit back and write the data down. They didn't just read the instructions. Like they were hands-on with the things, because a surprising amount of students will go as long as possible without touching the lab things. As in, even in my AP class, the last electric circuits unit, the way the lab groups ended up, one group was just sitting there staring at the equipment. I said, why aren't you guys getting started? They're like, we don't know how. I said, you've done 4 or 5 labs on this. They're like, somehow none of us actually did it and let the rest of them do it. Well, here's a life lesson, children. So they all have to try and get hands-on, and that's helping to build their confidence with the equipment and just being seen as a physics person. If the other group members are saying, oh, I trust that you are going to be doing this lab correctly, that your hands touching the equipment is going to help. It's also helping them to learn collaboration skills. So if you have the opportunity to discuss with your students, what does good collaboration look like? How do we manage that discussion? What happens when you disagree? Which is where the discussion poster can come along too. Oh, David?
So I'm one of these grumpy old men who still makes students turn in handwritten labs. And I explicitly call out I don't necessarily want to read the neatest handwriting. Um, First of all, I've subjected you to my handwriting, so I've got no ground to stand on morally. But that often what happens is that there are gendered stereotypes about who has neat handwriting, and I say I don't care about that. I need everybody doing different roles, and I need everybody touching the equipment and everybody writing. So just sort of naming the behavior that I'm afraid of at the start of class, and then being consistent about everybody does all the stuff.
Yeah. And it's important to see why certain trends are historic like that. You know, how many times have you been in a meeting where it has been defaulted that the woman will take the notes?
There's a so Brian wrote about it is a challenge between randomizing versus actually doing all this. One thing I do is I actually do randomize it, and then I just go quickly and see if I need to make any adjustments. Of course, it's easy in an algebra-based physics class where you don't have like two women, but it's a place to start. And then I try to, at least as much as possible, leave it randomized unless I see a big problem. Oh yeah. And there's another comment here from comments about electrical circuits. So I should say I was hired to teach all the electronics classes. So I teach 3 levels of electronics. And it is a huge problem. As an electronics student, it's hilarious. I was the one who never touched anything. I always let my lab partners do everything until the very end of the class where I was like, oh, wait, I don't actually know how to do anything. So I had to teach myself. And one of the things I do is on the first day, I show them a picture of me as a college student smiling so happily in front of my giant computer circuit that I built, just like getting them used to that fact of like, this is so fun and we're all going to do this. And then I also like all the things, there's lots of good research in the guide, by the way, but just thinking about how you encourage the women to take on those tasks, especially in electronics, that is a huge area. And for women, I found letting them know that all of it is safe, that they seem to be more concerned about a safety aspect. Like they think they're going to electrocute themselves because it's less of a chance they've had those experiences where they've been allowed to play with all of those things. So just being extra sure, say like, you're not actually going to electrocute yourself. Like batteries of this type are not going to give you shocks. All of that can really assure them and make them more willing to participate. Okay. So next topic is, addressing the class as a whole. So this is just how you set up that whole classroom environment and making sure that it's a place that welcomes everyone. If it welcomes everyone, it's going to welcome women and help everyone. So setting up those tones of collaboration, making sure that all the students can participate. So like things like providing rubrics on projects, which I know not everyone loves, but it really helps people see like, this is what I'm being graded on. And women, especially underrepresented minorities, like they can actually see all those expectations that aren't always made clear. So things like that, making sure that students know about what resources there are. So I take my students and walk them over to the tutor center so they know like these are the things available. I show them explicitly in the book where all the example problems are. I show them exactly like, hey, here's the extra videos I'm posting for you. Here's how you can use them. All these things that you may expect students have learned how to do. Some of them might have, but many of them might not have. And giving them that confidence to be able to do this. And then emphasizing that science is not done in isolation is a big thing. So many times women and other people, and this is all in the women in physics lesson, but they'll think about like, I don't want to be a physicist because they look like the people on Big Bang Theory, and that does not look very fun. And so if you've done that careers lesson, then the women in physics lesson, and help them see like, this is not, you're not going to go work off by yourself, which also means you're not working in this class all by yourself. That can be really helpful. And then finally, distributing your attention. So this is where it's helpful to have someone observe your class, or if you have an observation for tenure or whatever, ask them to look into this, because you don't always know, am I actually calling on the students who are always raising their hand, which may not be who you mean to, or am I really looking and saying like, this person knows what they're talking about, let me make sure I'm asking them, and paying attention to all the different people in my class. Oh, Ted, yes, this will be online, I think. Right? Yeah.
Yeah, we can share the presentation. Yeah, we're going to be sharing this. And then this is just, again, like our training presentation. So it just has kind of the snippets, and the larger teacher guide that I linked has more information. For the planning and assessing one, this one is always interesting because I feel like it's the deeper. Now I can teach. I got a couple years under my belt, perhaps, and I want to be doing better. And also how we're seeing a lot of our new credential candidates coming out, like they are already learning the better, aside from, as Dave was saying, like cranky old man moments. If you've been teaching a while, it's sometimes hard to change. Right? So in the planning and assessing, this is really looking at how you are setting up your lessons and also your grading system so that it is as free from bias as possible, and giving those students as many opportunities as possible to really show what they know and to try and avoid as many boundaries as you possibly can. So things like bringing in the real world examples is actually really good at making sure that all students are feeling like they have some attachment to physics. I'm as guilty as most as bringing a lot of stuff up into cars, for the first mechanics semester, and there's not as much that all of my students can attribute to because they don't drive much anymore, because my kids take too many AP classes. They don't have after school jobs, and so they don't have to drive anywhere. So trying to come up with new things that relates to their lives so that they feel like physics is in their life is difficult, but it's something that has to be conscionable. And making sure that you're aware of the types of examples that you're giving, and say the projectiles unit, that might be difficult for some people, or just feels like it's not part of their life or an unfortunate portion of their life. And connecting physics to the other disciplines. So one of the things that we see in that first graph where it showed higher levels of biology and chemistry, there's a persuasive, just cultural norm that women are carers. And if they are coming from that place and they feel like the life sciences are a better fit for them, that they can make changes in the world through that, you kind of meet them where they are. There are places where physics and biology combine. There are places where chemistry and physics combine, and that we help the world in those ways. So that bringing it back to that women in physics lesson helps as well. Jolene, did you want to add something?
Yeah, so I teach the algebra-based biological physics class, and there's so many good examples. Like, for instance, the torque lab, we always do the torque on a leg and thinking about when a leg might break, how much your muscles can hold up, right? Those specific examples, and saying like, this is really physics. And so many of them think that, I don't know, biologists just magically know how to do this stuff, but making those big connections can help them. And I've had a lot of students who switched over into like biomedical engineering or like some version of biology physics once they saw those connections.
With the increase in more equitable grading practices and research on that, we're finding that retakes are really good, and low stakes homework or no stakes homework are really good. And all these opportunities for students to have another bite of the apple, to have another chance to show what they understand, those are really benefiting our historically marginalized groups in physics, and specifically females. So all of those practices are really, really good, and helping them to see that if they don't get it just the first time, that they can still be a physics person. And that goes back to sharing our individual stories about when you got a C in the class, or when you didn't do well, or when you failed a class.
One thing that I do with the grading in my class for this is I know in high school you have to give retakes. When many high schools have to give retakes on tests, this grading can just kill you. And so in college, what I've developed is my students actually take 6 tests in intro physics, which is a lot, but it gives me a chance then to check in with them more often. And then I let them drop their lowest test. And in addition to that, I give them a chance where, let's say I have 2 tests on kinematics. The first one is 1D, the second one is 2D. If they can demonstrate on the 2D test that they've learned some of the skills on the 1D test, then I will go back and change their grade. So it's not a ton of extra grading on my part, but it's giving them a chance to say, like, I actually did learn this.
And then Jolene, you had linked this article that you wanted.
Oh yeah. So this was it was a new article that I'm getting my department to discuss. But I had found even in my department, which is really supportive, they were like saying, right, there's just nothing we can do. They're coming in unprepared, like these students, and they have a very deficit mindset of their students, where not blaming the students, but because of all the other problems in education, like these people aren't going to be physicists. But I just wanted to point out this article is all about how changing the course structure, and they give some ways to do it, there's specifics in there, really did close those gaps. And so convincing people that it's not something you can't solve, right? You may have students who were discouraged in high school or didn't have other things, but you can fix it. And sharing this with your department as much as possible. And also there's some really good ideas in this that help. One idea help minorities more and one idea help women more. So it's something that I thought could be useful as you're planning your class.
This is our last category of these main ones. And Jolene, you want to do this one? We'll probably both have things to share for this one.
Yeah, so outside the classroom, right? This is a huge area, especially in high school, but like you said, in college, more than I thought. I always am discovering places where this is a problem. But there's a lot of evidence that having these outside of the classroom activities is what really encourages women in physics. So for instance, like if you have women who are doing well in your class or who are just really interested, talking to them about joining your research team, or maybe you have like a small project they could work on, or maybe you're going to show them how to use the makerspace on campus, right? All of these really helpful things that you could do. But also talking to the other people in your college. So sometimes people in biology may not necessarily be encouraging their students in physics, but if you make a good relationship with the biology and chemistry professors and really talk about how your class is going to be supportive of their students, you're more likely to get their students into your class and you're more likely to have a good experience and tell everyone else about it. And then counselors, which I know we don't necessarily have to do, but I'm two things about that. One, I thought I was done with this after I left high school, but our college has started a visiting science program. So we as professors have said, these are the lessons that you may not have access to in your high school classrooms. And we will come whenever you want us to, and we will teach you how to do these. We will teach your class for you and bring in these experiments, which the high school teachers have loved. We've recruited students this way. But we also have started making a point of, can we talk to the guidance counselors and provide them information about what courses would really help the students come into our school and what are the expectations, so the guidance counselors don't think, right, that they're going to have all A's or have taken calculus, like, right, we will accept students who don't have this. And a lot of the times the counselors don't know that. We've also met with our admissions counselors to say a lot of the same information and making sure that they understand we don't need them to be straight A students. We will work with them where they're at, because they don't often hear that message, and that might not have been their experience if they ever had a bad physics experience, because they're more likely to be women and minorities. And so, right, it really helps get that message out.
Say a lot of these opportunities too don't have to be college. The college related, yes, but like internships, if there's anything that you know of, or even just advising them on if they're going to be going on to another school, which ones. We'll have a whisper network of which ones are helpful for which groups. And so that'd be another thing to talk to them about. But you do have the opportunities to have these conversations with your students, even if you're not advising them into another school. So looking at these guides and the things that we've been talking about, and you guys have been sharing great ones in the chat of different things that you've had to notice and be responsive in your teaching, which actions really resonated with you because you already use them, and which ones have you seen that have worked really, really well? You guys have been great about sharing that so far. And then what is something that you maybe have not used, but it has some new ideas, is something you'd like to do with all students? And so at this point, we'd like to think about these things and then have our group discussion. We'd like to break out for most of the remaining time to have smaller group discussions about what are we doing that we think are doing well, what are we doing that we'd like to, or not doing that we'd like to change, and then how might we adapt this for your setting. So I'm going to stop sharing now. I'm going to open up this PowerPoint into the chat because there is a slide on there for each of what could be our breakout rooms.